Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Budget Committee, where we have the bulk of the rest of the performance Minneapolis metrics. And thank you for enduring this. After today, we will be nearly at the end. Today, at our Budget Committee, we have with us Council members Andrew Johnson, Lisa Bender, Steve Fletcher, and Kevin Reich. I know that Council Vice President Jenkins will be joining us momentarily. We're going to start with our CPED, our Community Planning and Economic Development Department, which is a large one. We'll then move on to the Convention Center, Emergency Management, Neighborhood and Community Relations, and we will wrap up with 911. This is an ambitious agenda. I know there's going to be lots of questions, and I really welcome that. That is so much. This is such an improved process as to how things have been going, it feels like, the last few years. So with that, we'll jump right into it and welcome Director David Frank, if you want to come up and also introduce who you've brought with you today as you start. Welcome.
Will do. Thank you and good afternoon, Chair Palmisano and committee members. I'm David Frank, Director of CPED, and we're pleased to be here today to present our department's 2018 results. I'd like to thank first the results team in the coordinator's office, including Andrea Larson, Brian Smith, Anna Kelsch, and Jonathan Williams-Kinsel, who picked things up ably right at the last minute, for their help and guidance. And as you suggested, Madam Chair, I'm joined by the CPED leadership team, Andrea Brennan, our housing director, Eric Hansen, our economic development director, Heather Worthington, our long-range planning director, Karuna Mahajan, our operations and innovation director. Did I say Steve? Steve's here. Steve Poore, our development services director, sorry, and Chuck Lutz, our deputy director, is likely watching back at the office.
Thank you. If I might also just go up, you mentioned having just arrived. I did want to point out that different than how we've had other budget committees, the budget committee results, the dashboards and everything have been placed by our city clerk's office into council mailboxes to give a few extra days to have a chance to look at them. In the past, they've just been out here. So if you want me to have my staff go and help find yours, if you don't have it with you, I see some of you do have it though, just let me know. Also, I will be getting speaker management up, and we'll ask our clerk to be the person that runs that from department to department. And I also would like to welcome Council Vice President Jenkins, Council Member Cam Gordon, and our mayor. So thank you. Go ahead and continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, too, to our many CPED colleagues who are not here today for their work putting together the report and the information we'll present, and of course to all of them for the great work they do each day for the residents and businesses of Minneapolis. So, Madam Chair, CPED is doing great work, and as we'll describe, the timing disconnect between when the mayor and council set our budget and when the money is spent on our programs, or in some cases the projects are completed, is what has led to, I'll say, some confusion and some concern about looking at this very first page of our results summary. And I will describe in detail for each of the items how that comes into play. So with your permission, Madam Chair, I know you all have the summary, but I will instead move into the detail slides and cover the information in the summary as we go through each topic area, if that's okay. So there were several questions in our results analysis page that's posted on the city's website about staffing, so I thought I would start with those. So we've given you several handouts, paper handouts that you have up on the dais, and then I'll also put it on the overhead. And once you can see that, the point here is not to say that we don't have vacancies, but rather that the department's vacancies we actively manage, we recruit, we post, we have an application process, we interview, and we hire great people. So when you see the overhead and you have it in front of you, what I want you to take away is that at any given moment we have 15 or so vacancies in the department, and all of those, or almost all of those, have hiring that we are doing short term. Sometimes it's hard to find the right people, the kind of people we're looking for with the skills that we have to do our work. But in almost every case, it's a months-long process, and then that position is filled. There was a question in the analysis report about why aren't we shuffling people and or using our savings differently. So I wanted you to have that information. And then I'd like to combine that with the answer to the question in the results analysis report about rollover and tell you that very little of the rollover that we sought and that the council and mayor approved had to do with our vacancy savings from not having people on staff. Almost all of it was for the programs that we administer. So we have appropriations from the budget, and then we put out RFPs, and we have funding that goes from year to year and doesn't fit neatly within a calendar year. So I wanted to make those 2 points just as we get started. And Madam Chair, I should just assume that if there are questions that you or the committee has, you'll let me know and I can keep plowing ahead in the interest of time.
Yeah, this is a lot of information quickly,
Yep.
especially for people that haven't had a chance to maybe look
Sure.
at this previously. But because we are on this, let me maybe start, and as others have questions, I'm going to defer to them. But I'm curious, a healthy vacant period of a position in our city, meaning one that is going to turn over and be rehired and has that thing, might be a few months, would you say, because it is an elongated process of posting and such?
I would say that, Madam Chair, I would say it's closer to 6 months, because by the time someone has left and then we've evaluated the job description, done any recruiting, worked to make sure that people know about the position, posted it, closed, interview, and on, I'd say it's closer to 6 than 2 or 3, if that's your question.
Mm-hmm. It looked to me, per the position report, not the one that you just gave us, but the other one that I'd seen in the performance metrics gathering, that even in a fairly small department, long-range planning, there were 2 10-month plus long-range planning positions vacant. I know that your own position, the one that you occupy now, or actually, no, the one that you left to occupy this position, has been open for 14 plus months.
Correct.
So I'm curious if you wanted to spend a little bit of time on kind of what's your long-term plan, both from a long-range planning standpoint, whose work at this point, after Minneapolis 2040 is passed, is substantively different, I would imagine, and then your own plan for this other position that's been vacant for 14 plus months.
Madam Chair, thank you for the questions. As to long-range planning, we are in the steps that I just mentioned. We are recruiting and fixing to post, and I have with me the detail for each of the positions, so happy to go into that detail, but I would just say we want to make sure that we hire the right people with the right qualifications, given that the scope of what long-range planning will be doing now compared to what they were doing last year and in the years previous is different. So we want to make sure we have great people doing the right things. So it's a matter of evaluating the job descriptions and posting them and doing the hiring. So yes, those have been somewhat longer. And then as to it's actually 2 positions ago, I think you mean the transit-oriented development position. That's been vacant since I was in it. There have been periodic plans for it. And since you asked, our plan is to use that position for project management skills in a way that we will need after our current deputy director retires in a couple of months. So it's hard to find that kind of project management skill, but we're going to use that appointed position that way. And I'm happy to be able to say, I now realize what we were saving it for. So that's what that's for.
Thank you. That's helpful. And just to kind of mention to my colleagues, I mean, part of why we delve right into this and you have a position report in front of you is just because CPED is a very large division, but then just proportionally between CPED and other departments, it seems to have, over time, the most held vacancies in it. And so that's where my questions here stem from. I don't see any other questions in queue here, so go ahead.
Okay,
and
thank you.
continue.
So the slide in front of you, Madam Chair and committee members, is about workforce diversity, as well as women on staff, and then spending with diverse suppliers. And it's interesting, just by coincidence, we had a meeting just this morning down the hall of our RIDE committee, which is Racial Equity, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. We sort of made the words work to make a word, where we were gathering information from HR about best practices, what we can be doing better and more of, and working with our hiring managers on things like required training and other process improvements we can put in place to make sure that we keep improving on who we hire, and then separately and related, how we retain them, right? So I've had several of the committee members, I'm on that committee, I go every time, come to me and say, great, we do good work and we hire diverse applicants, and then they don't feel welcome or they feel like they're passed over for promotions. So we are working actively on that. And although I'm happy to say we are just above the city's goal for women in the workforce, we continue to try to do better. And I'll give us a little plug. I'm very happy that we have the women on our leadership team who are here representing today. And the other thing I'd say is that we continue to work within the constraints of the Target Market Program to hire diverse vendors and contractors for our work, period. So that's that.
And just to be clear,
Yep.
Director Frank,
Yep.
I just found this in my notes. There are currently 17 vacancies in your department, but out of how many positions total?
Madam Chair, 252.
Thank you.
In the department priorities section, the two things are Minneapolis 2040 implementation and economic inclusion. For code development, which is the name of the new section we formed earlier this year, Jason Wittenberg is the manager of that section. And as I think many of you know, we are going to staff it with some permanent FTEs and then some loaned FTEs from other divisions as a way to contribute as a corporation would to expertise and silo busting and not burning people out and building experience. And we're very excited to see how that works out. The code development team will be bringing forward its work plan soon for steps towards the zoning code that implements the 2040 comp plan and other short-term things. So as you know, under Chair Schrader, the Zoning and Planning Committee has approved work plans in the past for zoning code text amendments, and this updated work plan will include the work that starts once we get our comp plan back from Met Council, more on that soon, to do the zoning code changes that are required to implement the comp plan. And as to economic inclusion, I will say with the mayor sitting here that we have recommended to the mayor a series of investments to further economic inclusion, and we are hoping that some of those will be included in his recommended 2020 budget. And we have begun and are in the process of reviewing our existing programs from a racial equity standpoint also. Let me talk about affordable housing developments. I'll refer you to your other handout and to the overhead. So you'll note that on the very first page, after the title page of the results report, it says that we produced 46 affordable units in 2018 with 18-some million dollars. And I have fielded questions from many of you saying, what's up with that? And I'm here to say it's not what it seems, right? So the results report uses 2018 budget. So I agree that 18-some million dollars is the right number. And the new units, the production of 46 units, is the units which were completed for people to move into in 2018. So in fact, those were units that were financed 3 and 4 years previously. So there's a 2 to 3 to 5 year timing mismatch between what you're seeing as to the budget, which is a current year 2018 budget, and the units, which are understandably being counted when they exist for real people to move into. See? So there's a disconnect of 18 million current and 46 units it's actually from a few years ago. So in in the way we would explain it.
I'm sorry, Director Frank, if I may.
Of course.
Let's see, Councilmember Cunningham.
Sorry, I'm over here in the corner. So actually, to go back to the department priorities, I was
Yes.
wanted to ask about that. So I'm really excited and grateful to see that economic inclusion is a department priority. Can you speak a little bit more to how you plan to operationalize that? Does that include new staff? Does that include new programming? What does that look like?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, yes to those things plus more. So just in the interest of time, I glossed over pretty quickly some of the in-depth looks that we're taking at our staffing, how we hire people and how we retain people to make our department workforce more diverse and keep it that way after we've hired people. No sense hiring someone and then having them leave because it's not a good place to work. Also, in addition to new recommendations that we've recommended to the mayor for economic inclusion, we are evaluating our existing programs. You'll hear me talk about some of them today and others that we're just getting started from a racial equity perspective. Are we funding things in a way that doesn't encourage the results we're looking for? You'll hear me talk about a few of those things. Should we be funding things through partners? Are we funding things through partners we should be doing ourselves? We're putting things on the table to say, what should we be doing differently, if anything, to get the results that we want from a racial equity perspective?
If I may ask a follow-up question. So when you say we in a racial equity perspective, who is that and what is that? And where is that lens coming from? How is it defined? I'm just curious as to how that's applied here.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, great question. So in some cases, as with the workforce that we were just talking about, there are adopted city goals that are numeric and we can be doing better to get closer to and surpass. In other cases, it's programmatic results. Are the people who are getting our small business loans or our housing loans or our development projects, are they people of color? And what are we doing to address the disparity if there is one? In some cases, it's a disparity between the results or percent that white people achieve and people of color achieve. So it's just a straight disparity, and we want to close that gap. And I'm sure there are other cases that I'm not thinking of at the moment. It depends on the circumstance.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, affordable housing. So you have a handout, and I've put on the overhead. We would describe the 46 units that's shown as our 2018 production, which again is units available for people to live in, as a slowdown in this trend over time that we have taken steps to address when we notice this happening. And the steps we've taken have increased production noticeably. These steps include allowing contingency for affordable housing trust fund projects to get projects which are ready to close over the finish line. It's worth noting that in 2018, we had a historic high number of project closings, 11, 12, how many? 12, thank you. And we expect to increase on that number of closings this year, partly due to the mayor's recommendation and the council's approval of the city's historic high level of investment in affordable housing. It's worth noting that our Met Council goals change every 10 years. So at the lower graph on this page. And our goals starting in 2021 show that if we had projected our past performance forward, we would have fallen short of our Met Council 30% of median unit goals. So we made changes, for instance, in the 2019 trust fund RFP to increase award amounts and have higher award amounts for 30% units and even higher award amounts for 30% units which have 2 or 3 bedrooms. And because of these changes and other things, we will be on track to meet our targets, as you saw in the chart at the top of the page.
Councilmember Goodman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to note that I really think we should be talking about changing the language surrounding this. We don't produce any housing at all. To leave out there the idea that the city produces housing is a setup to failure immediately. And I don't think we should be noting how many units are built as a judgment, since we're not the ones building the housing in the first place. I think it would make more sense from a way to judge it if we can list how much money we leveraged based on the amount of money we put in, because that's what we're really judging, is the leverage of other sources. Mm-hmm. We can't be responsible for the disinvestment in housing from the federal and state government. So I would prefer to see us, rather than judging how many units were built, which I don't think is a fair analysis, and I certainly take issue with us suggesting we produced anything, and I don't think you are. You're taking blame, and I don't think you should do that. I also think we should just basically look at a results line item that said how much money was leveraged and how much money was invested overall. That's really what we can only judge ourselves by. We can't judge ourselves by the total number of units built. Also, it's costing more to build each unit. So, I mean, in the old days, I guess I would say maybe 10 years ago, we would be appalled if the total cost per unit was above 250,000. Now we're over 3. And so, again, if we're judging ourselves, which we shouldn't, based on the number of units produced, we're always going to be chasing a goal we can never meet. So I would hope that the coordinator's office and whoever is working on putting these numbers together views it from the leverage our money has produced, as well as the total investment at each level. That would better explain how we're doing on participating in our role in producing affordable housing.
Thank you. I believe that this supplemental material was actually provided by CPED, is that correct?
The handouts that you
The
have?
handouts that you have on the overhead?
Correct,
right now?
Madam Chair, that's correct.
But I think that's a really good point. Mayor Fry, did you have something to add?
Yes, just briefly, Madam Chair. Well, I agree with Councilmember Goodman that it would be helpful to include money leveraged and total amounts of money in there. Even if we are not solely responsible for the number of units produced, it is kind of a nice figure just to see. It's nice to see what the conclusion is. And so I would support having the additional items in there that Councilmember Goodman had. Perhaps a note that says that the city is not the developer and we're not solely responsible for the buildings going up, but just seeing the units tracked is helpful, at least to me.
Well, we're required to track the units by the Met Council and also the Family Housing Fund and the others that track that. But it shouldn't be, what's happening here is these folks are being judged by us and the public on a number that doesn't make any sense since we're not a builder of housing.
Right. So we can note that on the results along with the units.
So this is great because this is exactly the kind of conversation that we should be having is, you know, in these kinds of results meetings, and we should be having them now. The kinds of ways we can change this is something that I hope these sessions can bring about. Councilmember Gordon and then Council President Bender.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about what was in the results on the slide, but I also just wanted to agree with the mayor that I think it's really important that we track this. And it's also important that we don't just talk about how much money we spent, because we'd be really frustrated if we spent $1 gazillion and we saw 2 additional units, because we want to make sure that what we're investing in is having the results that we want, which at this point it seems to be to see more affordable units of housing built and to preserve those that are already there. I think having this in our results is important. I actually think it's better when we reach outside of our own little metrics that we're doing within our own departments and city. It's not how many people we've contacted or how much money we've distributed in grants. It's actually why we're doing that I'm interested in measuring. So how many people are healthy or happy, or however we measure those bigger goals, I think, are why we do the work. So it's important to do that too. If we could just go back to the disturbing image in the report on the affordable housing. So with the preservation, existing affordable units preserved, it says we've only preserved 12 so far this year. By the end of the year, do we think that will change?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, I believe that's a total for 2018. That's not a year-to-date of 2019.
And so these aren't, we're not waiting for any results or anything like that, but that was a total that we preserved for 2018. Why was it so much, so fewer than 2017?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, I will offer and then ask Ms. Brennan if she has anything to add, that preservation is a market-responsive, non-predictable, it's not always possible kind of an exercise. So in some cases, and we do have resources available to assist preservation buyers, in some cases they're able to make a deal, and in some cases they aren't. And so in previous years, those buyers had more success, and in 2018 they had less success. Is that cool?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Gordon, I would just add to what Mr. Frank said, that this also does not reflect a lot of the new initiatives around the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing So it doesn't include the preservation of 4D program, for example, and the NOAA preservation that has occurred, some of that in 2018, but the majority of that is actually in 2019. And so that will be reflected in the results report that you see next year, as well as several of the other NOAA preservation strategies, the results of which will likely be realized this year and reported next year.
So just help us understand a little bit more about what it means to preserve a unit of affordable housing. I don't know, does the 12 indicate that there were many units that were affordable the previous year and now aren't? I mean, displacement is a big issue that we're concerned about, and I'm wondering if we're measuring that at all. So I'd be interested to know if we lost thousands of units of affordable housing to more expensive housing.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, the definitions in use here are with the help of city financing and recapitalization, new long-term affordability. So just the first part of that was, so what are we counting? And the answer is, to the second part, there were certainly deals that got pursued in 2018 where either there's not a willing seller or the preservation buyer couldn't or didn't offer enough money, and so those were not acquired by preservation buyers with city money. That doesn't mean necessarily that there were tenants in those properties who no longer could afford to live there, but it might.
But I guess my point is this graph doesn't actually show us how many of those flipped from affordable to market rate.
Correct.
In fact, if there were only 12 opportunities for us to intervene and we were successful, we should be celebrating. So that's hard to predict. It might have been that there were so many more opportunities to participate in 17 that 900 we were able to influence or whatever. So, and I don't know how we get to those, the meat of that, but I think we'd be less concerned if we thought nothing flipped to market rate, but we were able to preserve 12. But we suspect probably a lot more did flip to market rate, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, you're right. This does not take into account, was this 100% success or was this failure, meaning we didn't get many of them or the buyers did not get many of them. And I would suspect anecdotally that, yes, there were some conversions to market rate.
Yeah, so I think more discussion about what we're supposed to be measuring and how we're actually tracking what are important. I don't really have a necessary answer. Although I think we'd be concerned if we were, I think looking at these things, it can make one worry that we're losing all sorts of affordable units and we're not keeping up with what we've lost. And there is a little note that we have lost more affordable than we've produced and preserved down at the bottom.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon, Ms. Brennan has reminded me that the answer to your question, while not perfectly knowable, is being tracked by the Interagency Support Stabilization group. So there is some information available. It's not in this results report, and we don't have it here, but there is some tracking that is happening.
Well, those are some of the best results to put in our reports if someone else is tracking it and we have confidence in what they're doing. So maybe we can think about, can we borrow some of that and get it in the reports in the future? Thank you.
So thank you. This is really meant to be about the performance of a department in one of our city departments. I did want to mention, and Director Frank, if you could move ahead one slide to slide 7. I think this is the leverage for housing that is being included in the results report too. So per some earlier questions about trying to quantify our leverage, I wanted to point out this slide. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually had some questions that were along the lines of those Councilmember Gordon was raising, and maybe I'll phrase it in the interest of time first as a concern, which is that I'm concerned that we are not looking at a package of tools to meet specific goals strategically over time as we're trying to solve these complex issues of rising housing costs and displacement in our city. And so I'm concerned that we're being too reactive. And I'm very concerned that when we see strategies like preservation, which my colleagues in cities across the country that have gone through the cycle that we're in now and now are completely unaffordable for working people, tell me that the number one thing that they would recommend cities like ours to do is preserve existing affordable housing. And I see that we aren't doing that. So I have concerns about how we're approaching again, what I know are complex issues around housing stability and displacement in our city. And so I think some of the questions that have come up so far, and maybe to phrase it as a question, is are we able to use this data, this information, cost per unit of new construction, cost per unit of preservation, length of time that a unit remains affordable? If it's 4D, it's not very long. It flips back to market very quickly. And are we able to use this information, this data, to reach specific goals that us as council members are able to give more strategic direction to the department, instead of coming to work one day and hearing that we're planning to spend $3 million on this or $2 million on that or $10 million on that without any information to help us understand why the department is recommending these particular things today.
Madam Chair, Council President Bender, I think the question that I'll try to answer, I hope it's responsive to what you asked, is can and should we be more strategic about how we invest in this example, preservation dollars, to achieve the desired end of preserving housing so people can still afford to live there and in the city?
I would actually rephrase it and say, if we took $40 million and looked at how we would best reach particular goals, have we even defined those goals? Do we know that our goal is getting the maximum number of units in our entire city at a certain AMI? Or are we operating essentially without even having defined those overall goals for how we're spending affordable housing dollars, whether it be for new construction or preservation, so that when we're trying to decide between spending millions of dollars on this or perhaps trying to invest more in these other particular things, knowing there are barriers, do we have those goals defined even to begin with?
Madam Chair, Council President Bender, so I'll start with production. Yes, we do. These are the Met Council goals and the package of affordable housing investments we make, because as Councilmember Goodman pointed out, we don't build them, we invest in projects where they get built by others. Those are the income targets that we are trying to hit for units, for affordable units and for very low income units. And as I was saying, we think that we are achieving success given the changes we've made with your investment and with the mayor and council's investment and with the mayor and council's strategic direction on how we spend the money in the different programs. So as to production, I think it's the Met Council goals. For preservation, there are several programs that the mayor and council have funded with policy input, with policy formation by us to work in the private market. And so as I was saying to Councilmember Gordon, we are trying to be responsive to private market where other people are typically willing to pay lots more than we can or should, right, to mark units up to market rate. And so sometimes a preservation buyer with an investment from us can be successful, and we need to be quick about it. When we come in one day and say we need to spend a few $1 million now, it's because otherwise those units will be lost. And it is very much in a strategic direction as established by the council, I would say, as you formed blessed us forming the programs and signed off on the budget to fund the programs that do that, as to preservation, for instance. So the goal is, in that case, to preserve as many units as possible in a market-responsive way and not overpay as we do it. There's much more there.
Mayor Fry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just note that CPED is slightly different than some of the other departments in that a lot of the investments that we make and the policies that we implement take time to actually see to fruition. And I think this is just one prime example. And I agree with Council President's mentality that we need to be really strategic. And the results that we're looking at right now were from 2018, and that was before many of the programs that we now have implemented and before the vast majority of the funding that we now have allocated was even there. And so I anticipate that you'll see results indicative of the work that we've been doing next year.
Director Frank, is that fair? Something I notice and appreciate about some of the timelines that you give in this space is that these are 10 years of reporting, and it's because it does take a few years for money that becomes known and available to actually find itself into a way that builds something. So how many years would you suspect we are looking at with, say, last year's, unprecedented investment in millions of dollars for affordable housing?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. So I would say the mayor's right, as is the direction of your question, right? So for new production, when we put out a trust fund RFP, it's easily 3 or 4 or 5 years before, in the way we currently count units, when people can move into them, that the project is done being built, which takes a year or two, and has done its. So there can be quite a timing disconnect between the funding being available and when people can move in. It's worth talking about, should we count units a different way? Right, I'm not trying to cheat, just to say, like, we would see a closer alignment in timing if we counted when the units were, the funds were committed, or the project closed, or whatever. As to preservation, I would say we will hopefully see some results sooner because those programs are funded, and if a preservation buyer is successful acquiring a piece of property and preserving it longer term for tenants at affordable rents, then that happens faster because that's not a thing that has to be built. The financing is much faster. There'd be results sooner.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just also fairly note that not all of the money the mayor allocated is going into production. We've got rental assistance, we've got navigation center, we're taking over Hennepin County's role on homelessness. So, I mean, all this money isn't going into preservation. I'll also note that, or into building new units. And since we're just saying do what the latest crisis is, the money is spread out instead of kind of put in deeply. I'll also note that, I mean, the housing staff doesn't have more staff, but there have been more staff directions than staff available to do the work to get the housing done. And so if we keep adding more policy things to the agenda without having staff to do that work, we're not going to have as many staff to work on production either. So we might want to look at what we're doing also.
Noted. Councilmember Fletcher, I'm sorry, I did skip over you.
Thank you, Chair Polisano. Just real quick, given the outcome that we are looking at here on preservation, I do think there's a value in looking at outcomes, right? So we do want to look at units, at some level to understand what's happening. Did we gain or lose affordable units in the city last year? Do you think, given the challenge that we had getting preservation deals to go through, did we lose more affordable units to the market than we were able to produce, or do you think we gained some ground?
That's a good question. Do you think we know offhand?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, what I can say is that at this point we have a subscription to a data set called CoStar, so that we can over time evaluate how we're faring relative to the affordable, where rents are, how affordable they are, and what's happening to those over time. That wasn't part of looking back in 2018 for this presentation, but we are happy to dive into that data and put together a more detailed presentation about what we can learn from that. That data does look specifically at 4 and more units. About 30% of our rental housing stock in the city of Minneapolis is in 1 to 3 units, so we still have a deficiency in data as it relates to 30% of our rental stock. But yes, we are prepared to better track the data on the rest of it, and we'll be doing so.
Thank you. Council President Bender, and then Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't need to take up too much more time with this, but I actually think there's a significant room for improvement in using the data that Ms. Brennan just described to help us make policy decisions around how we're spending millions of dollars of funding to help people stay in our city. And so I'll continue to follow up on that. It's something I've been working on since I took office, when Councilmember Reich and I first gave staff direction to get more information about our market so we could understand how many affordable units were in our market. I think that data is really important to help us understand where in our city and what kinds of projects we're investing in. And there are trade-offs. There are neighborhoods in our city which will not be affordable in 5 years at the current trajectory of our housing market. And we're doing very little to stop that change. And that may be a decision that this body would make actively if presented with that information, but I don't recall ever giving that kind of direction to staff. I think it's happening because we're sometimes coming in here to vote on a navigation center, or sometimes we're voting on some other random thing. And I feel like we need to do a much better job of being proactive on behalf of our constituents who are depending on us to be able to even live in our city in the very near future.
Thank you, Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to Councilmember Goodman's point about the number of staff directions versus staff, it appears that there's 17 positions that are unfilled, and so the resources are there to have staff to deal with those staff directions. But I'm curious, Mr. Frank, if you mentioned committee that you have within CPED, race equity. I'm not sure if I know the whole acronym.
Madam Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, it's we call it RIDE for Racial Equity, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. We had to chop it up a bit to get the acronym we wanted, but.
So, is there like a breakdown of the 252 positions relative to race and gender?
Madam Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, on this slide, which I'm happy to go back to, you can see our current, at the end of 2018, it was 28% people of color. We're at 29% today. I just heard that this morning. And just under half of the department is women.
Thank you very much.
Council President Bender.
Very brief point. We have added more staff. It's specifically in response to the notion that we were asking CPED housing to do too much. We added an entire FTE specifically focused on housing stability. So we are adding staff when we're asking for more results.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Madam Chair, we're about to leave housing for a minute. We're going to come back to talk about home ownership, but we're leaving for a second.
Okay, before you do,
Okay.
I'm curious to a point that the council president made.
Yep.
Just talking about, we have data and haven't utilized it. Is that a matter of we haven't utilized it, or council hasn't given you real clear direction, or perhaps we keep changing direction on how we're supposed to utilize it? And I don't mean to ask you a loaded question. It's kind of it's an open point. Do we have data and we're not utilizing it because we haven't given clear direction for that, or set our priorities and then stuck to them over time? Or
Well,
it's just more of an open question.
Sure.
It's probably unfair for me to ask you to respond.
That's right. Madam Chair, you might mean one of two things, I think, right? So one is, if there's this other data, why isn't it in the results report? But I think you're asking the other question, if there is information about neighborhoods in Minneapolis that are gentrifying so quickly that soon lower income people will no longer be able to give there, and where's the council's chance to weigh in on that policy, and what are we doing about that? Is it that second thing? Yeah. That is an open-ended question. I would say it has not been the practice since I've worked for the city to have a discussion about what is the right income mix for a given neighborhood and work to achieve those income targets. I noticed that when I first moved here about 18 years ago, and if the council is interested in having that conversation, we sure can. But I would say, to the council president's point, that is not any direction that we've heard, and it's not like we're sitting hoping we don't get it. Just that is. Anyway, I'll stop.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Go ahead and move on to, you said we were going to veer off.
Just for a few minutes. So our construction code services section in development services is charged with reviewing and inspecting our seventh year in a row, the city's seventh year in a row, over $1 billion in permits. And you can see it reflected in the permit count. The permit count doesn't tie perfectly to the dollars, because sometimes a project by count is more expensive or less expensive by building permit value. But as Mr. Poore likes to remind us, once we've reviewed the plans, done a land use approval, reviewed the plans, and giving a building permit, there's still several years of inspections to do. So the construction code services staff will be busy inspecting our seventh and sixth year of record building permits for the next few years. Our business development team continues to serve businesses owned by people of color through BTAP, Business Technical Assistance Program, and our small business lending programs with, we think, great success. And in response to one of the questions in the results cover page, if you will, we've relied on a network of culturally specific technical assistance providers in the BTAP program, and we think largely because of that, the participants shown here reflect the results we'd like to see in the program. This is part of what I was thinking of when I was responding to Councilmember Cunningham earlier. So as you know, we recently brought forward recommendation for next year's BTAP funding, and we're in the middle of signing contracts with an updated batch of technical assistance providers. So we're confident that we'll continue to see these great results in terms of serving businesses owned by people of color with BTAP, and similarly for our small business program, lending programs.
Director Frank, what strategies have been particularly effective in attracting this more diverse group of participants that we can call out?
Madam Chair, the main thing that we would point to is the decision some years back by Miles Mercer, the manager of the department, and Daniel Bonilla, who I will give credit to for helping to come up with the program and designing how it works even today, is the decision to use as technical assistance providers who respond to our RFP and then we sign contracts with culturally specific, culturally aware and sensitive technical assistance providers, so that a business on West Broadway or East Lake Street walks in, sees someone who looks like them, who's prepared to help them with issues on the table that they both have in common. So that's what we point to.
Thank you.
And then this slide is about our Great Streets Facade Matching Grant Program. And you'll note that there was a little bit less leverage in the program this year because most of the projects were smaller. So we invested a very comparable amount, and the private investment is a little bit less, mostly because the projects were smaller. We don't think that's a long-term trend. We just think that's what happened in 2018. And we're back to housing. I promised we'd come back quickly. Our number one goal in home ownership is to reduce racial disparities. Our number one goal. So in our home program, we've doubled our rate of service to households of color since we paired the program with financial wellness counseling in 2015. The Minneapolis Homes program that acquires and sells vacant properties for development has seen a significant increase in the diversity of participants, and real estate projects developed through our homeowner financing have consistently had a rate of service to households of color or indigenous people of 60 to 70% for the past 10 years, and this is increasing. And the increasing diversity of beneficiaries of our programs is due in large part to the extensive outreach and engagement efforts that city staff has done. City staff has hosted or participated in 12 events, this was in 2018, serving a total audience of 900 people, and this was just for the Minneapolis Homes program.
So Director Frank, just a question. The reasons behind applications being withdrawn or denied on the owner-occupied rehabs, but maybe you can also help us understand how long does it typically take to process an application for something like that?
Sure. Madam Chair, would you be willing to come up and answer? As I think you're asking about this, the unfunded ones or the applications that were withdrawn? I'm not sure which thing you were asking about.
Withdrawn or denied. So that slide that you're on.
The green.
The green, yeah.
There were 8 and then 9 that were withdrawn.
Sure, Madam Chair. This refers to the city's homeownership improvement program, which, as we've described here, has changed from being outsourced, where a nonprofit has administered this program for the last 20 or so years, to being something that's internally administered. And we made that recommendation to bring this program administration in-house, in part because the nonprofit that was administering it was no longer viable for them to continue. We hired a financial advisor to do a financial assessment of what is more cost-effective to administer either in-house or through another third-party provider. The results of that analysis was that it was more cost-effective to do that internally, so we staffed up to be able to do that. The answer to the question about the timing of how long it takes to process this changes because in 2017 it was still in the process of having the nonprofit provider doing that. Now we're doing that. In 2018 we hired staff, and we've been in this transitional mode of getting geared up, getting the systems in place necessary to administer this program. In terms of why someone would have withdrawn their application or would not be eligible, this program is primarily funded with Community Development Block Grant Funds, or CDBG. And while this is a great use of CDBG funding, there are certain requirements. There are income requirements. There are eligible, improvement requirements. So not any improvement to a home is eligible. So there's a lot of program requirements that at the time someone expresses interest and maybe even submits an application, they may not be fully aware of all of those requirements. This is a very, very staff-intensive program. A lot of we want this to be as accessible as possible to all homeowners in the city, and so there's a lot of hand-holding and helping homeowners understand all of the requirements of the program, and so there's a lot of opportunity for either the requirements aren't met or the homeowner to determine that this is just not the best fit for them as well.
Sure, thank you. Sorry, Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually wanted to also ask a question about the owner-occupied rehab. So a large portion of my ward, the single-family homes are very old. And so how are we getting the word out about this program? And do we have it disaggregated geographically as to who is actually utilizing the resources?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, yes, we certainly do have it disaggregated by location. You can, I think we have it here right on the screen by race, but as to location, yes, we do. I don't think we have it here with us, but we're happy to follow up. Yes, we do.
What's on the screen is for a different program. So
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry, Councilmember Cunningham, which program?
So I was talking about the owner-occupied rehab program.
Thank you.
So I just had some concerns about the where it's being accessed, because I get a lot of questions from constituents and I try to refer them over, but and in my ward I have a lot of low and moderate wealth families who own homes, and the housing stock is like a lot of homes are 100 years old, and so needing a lot of maintenance. So I'm just curious about who is leveraging it, where, and how do we get the word out more? I know it's staff intensive, but this is really important to some families.
Sure. Do you want to say something? Okay. Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, why don't we follow up with you if that's okay? Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep.
Let's see. Slide 12. So again, the city's homeownership programs overall, which include homeowner capacity building and down payment assistance and production of new housing units, have an overall rate of service to households of color and indigenous of 78%. And the highest rate of service is to the African American community, Black community, at 48%. This is the community that experiences the deepest disparity in homeownership rates in comparison with other racial groups. So just thought that was worth noting. Let's see. This is adult workforce development. So our Adult Career Pathway Fund was created this year to support employer-led projects that provide talent solutions for employers and career laddering opportunities for job seekers. We've funded 10 projects in the Minneapolis Pathways Fund, and the city, with us participating or leading 8 other career pathways programs, And our attention has focused on getting Minneapolis residents the skills and credentials they need for a job they can use to build a career. So you'll see that there were fewer placements in 2018, and that's on purpose. That's the result of more attention and spending on career pathway programming, because we think that helping Minneapolis residents overcome barriers to entering the labor market continues to be a key focus, and one of those barriers is skill attainment. Wage gains, which I had to ask about this, appeared flat last year at the completion of training, is somewhat to be expected as we move farther away from the recession. So what's happening is across many programs, we're seeing the wage at program enrollment, so a gain is from enrollment to exit. The wage at program enrollment is higher than in recent years. Because of the economy, many are able to enter the workforce and have higher paying jobs than they've had in the past when we first started training them. So the 6 months before people go through training, they're earning more than they have in the past. So we determine how much they were making ahead of time and how much they're making afterwards, and that's the wage gain. So the gain is not as much as it has been, and the fact that these two are so similar is just more coincidence than anything else. So again, a couple things to take away: a conscious choice to focus more on pathways, and that wage gains are understandably flat because people are earning more because thanks to the economy before they get started on the training. In our youth program, as I hope you all know, we continue to have great success with our Step Up program in attracting and providing service to youth of color. And as you'll see, we have had a difficult time last year and again this year making placements in the Step Up summer program. Frankly, in a good economy, there are more opportunities for young people, which are opportunities which are not the Step Up program. And while that's a good thing, and we are in a competition, so in a good economy, it's easier for businesses to find workers, and workers then have a place to be, and that business might want someone full-time and permanently and with specific skills. It's also worth noting that last summer, just as Step Up was beginning, we found out we received less funding from a state deed program we rely on heavily for the program. We found out about that just as internships began, and we had to curtail some of the youth's summer employment. Our business licensing program has led the way, we think, in the Business Made Simple work, and that will be reflected over time in this chart on the left in showing the reduction of license categories. This is the first year of this measurement, so we don't have a comparison to share. And we thought that you'd find it interesting that liquor licenses, which is one of the most closely tracked categories of businesses in the city, has been stable as a total number, not the type, but the total number over the past few years. Our land use, design, and preservation section has continued to review and improve and approve more and more projects and applications. And as I explained earlier, our new code development section is also in place. Madam Chair, to the question you asked earlier, long-range planning, this is about 2018, was very busy, as we all know, throughout 2018, preparing and finalizing Minneapolis 2040, including 56 community meetings just in 2018 and many thousands of comments. In the customer service center, shown here, the gradual decrease in blue in walk-in customer interactions over the last few years is actually a positive result of the movement towards online permitting. So the movement has gradually increased the percentage of total permits issued online, such that it's now 32% in 2019 year to date. So the reason the walk-ins are going down is because more and more people are doing it online. And we believe that the uptick in customer waiting time in orange in 2017 was, in part anyway, due to staff adjustment to the new operating system that we're all very familiar with. And then the downward trend since, we think, suggests that staff have become more comfortable using this system. And since we're here, I would just say that as we look to the new city office building next year, with the key feature of a reworked public service area, I think it's important to highlight how important we think it is to have this group as part of CPED. It allows the team to work together together with land use design and preservation and zoning sections and our inspectors, and under the supervision of one director, so that we have consistent results and outcomes that the development community and we think you all are expecting from us.
Director Frank, per that last slide, I'm curious if you think that in part customer interactions have gone down because it requires less trips for those that are coming to be at your service desk because they're able to get multiple things they might need done in one visit versus multiple visits. And per your point of better coordination with that desk now than there has been in the past, do you think that plays into this at all?
Madam Chair, yes, now that you mention it, I do think that that's part of it. The main thing I wanted to point out was with our new online possibility that we think that that's a lot of it. But yes, I think as people realize they can take care of more than one thing at a time, developers, contractors, homeowners, that yes, they realize they can visit and do two things at once. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
The small business team is well known to all of you, I hope. And the growth in cases from 2017 to 2018 is a reflection, we think, of the increased awareness of the team. The small business team did a lot of things, had many strategies to increase awareness of them. They canvassed commercial corridors. They hosted office hours at 6 locations citywide. They did engagement with business support organizations, and they helped to create the Minneapolis Business Portal, which launched in February of 2018. And by the way, in 2018, the business portal had over 11,000 visits from over 8,000 unique visitors. So we think it's a success. And as you can see, the type of cases show what kinds of questions entrepreneurs and business owners start with, and we would just underline that's not necessarily the area that poses the biggest challenge for an individual business. And as you can see, the most frequent question that new entrepreneurs in particular come to the small business team with is whether they need a business license, and if so, what kind. And as Zotil, the manager of the team, points out, very often that question is straightforward, but the issues that come up aren't. And that's why we think it's great that we have a small business team, and sometimes it's a referral to BTAP for technical assistance, and sometimes to business development for a small business loan, and sometimes to reg services for some other kind of issue. Food businesses are the most frequent type the small business team works with, followed by childcare, transportation, beauty salons, and general retail.
Director Frank, the small business team's caseload, it looks like, has grown about 400%.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, in this, on the left side of your slide.
Yep.
How is staff managing that kind of increased workload? Because my understanding is that the number of staff in this department have not changed.
Madam Chair, the second half first, you are right. It began with 3 and still has 3. We think that there could be room to grow there and that we could serve more small businesses if there were more staff. The answer to the question is, though, it's not unlimited, that the staff has obviously got the capacity to provide the good service to more. They had more capacity than to serve the 100-some in 2017 and are taking advantage of that increased capacity in 2018. It's not unlimited, but yeah, and they're terrific.
It's okay for now.
Thank you. It's okay for now. The small business team is also developing data collection tools to be able to report in more depth about who they serve, including demographics and how things work out in the end. We don't just want to see people as they show up and then not know, did this work out well, and what did we do to achieve success, and what changes should we make?
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really love the small business team. They do a lot of amazing work. So at a panel in my ward for a small business summit, I really look to them for us when it comes to the city's goal of increasing the amount of businesses owned by people of color and indigenous folks. So I'm curious around how do you see all of the resources that you currently have and the skill sets that you currently have at the table to be able to achieve that goal? Is there enough capacity? Where could the capacity be grown? Skill sets that are needed, and how you see within this work, in addition to BTAP, because BTAP is one program. So how do you see that fitting together for us to be able to grow the number of small businesses owned by people of color, American Indians?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I'm so glad you framed the question that way. That is exactly how we are thinking about it too, and to respond to your question. So, as I just said to Madam Chair, first of all, there's room to grow if we choose to add resources to the team. So there are 3 of them, and they're fantastic, but as I say, that's not unlimited. And when there are referrals that Ms. Teal and her team make to other parts of both CPED and then other city departments, we have it set up such that there's a handoff, and a warm handoff, as we say, from the small business team, frequently directly to the technical assistance provider, who is culturally appropriate and located where this business is or wants to be located. Sometimes we're able to give referrals directly to specific lending programs, and we're looking for ways, though we've had good success, we're looking for ways to use the small business team to do exactly what you said. We're not sure, as you can tell from my answer, exactly what's the thing to turn on, but that is how we're thinking about it.
Has there been, thank you, Madam Chair, if I may. So has there been, so we've had these 2 days of, with the SREEP discussions. What was reported out was, connecting more business owners or, entrepreneurs and business owners to more resources. What kind of conversations have there been around what additional resources that CPED needs to offer and what that would look like in terms of it being operationalized?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, the planning meeting for post SREEP, what do we do to turn this into the life of the existing programs or to create new programs, is either next week or the week after. So unfortunately, there's a timing mismatch. I would say we're eager to use what we heard from those two one-day sessions to inform what we do next. And we have, I'm happy to say, made some recommendations to the mayor for potential inclusion in his budget to do exactly what you're talking about.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. We have council members Johnson and Jenkins in queue, and I think you, sir, had your flag up before. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment really on the measurements here. For future metrics, I think it would be great to know how many times, because something that happens often, as Zoe knows, for a lot of Ward 12 businesses, that they're told no, and then we connect them up to the small business office, and then we find a way to get to yes. So I think it would be helpful to have some context around that, like how many cases actually are we able to work through resolution to help businesses be able to move forward with their plans, and then also more on the larger scale kind of proactive work around working to improve processes within city departments to make them more friendly for our small businesses. I know that's kind of sensitive as well. We don't want the small business team out dictating to other departments how to do their work, but certainly they work in partnership with other departments on making process improvements, trying to simplify and make it easier. And so I think it would be great to have some insight in future metrics into that as well. And just want to express my appreciation for all the work that the team does.
Thank you, Council Member Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Frank, I'm not sure if my question is that dramatically different from Council Member Cunningham's, but I just, I hear from so many businesses that they're appreciative of the services currently offered. A lot of times they're not able to even take advantage of, for example, a 2% loan because of financing. Is there any thoughts around how do we prepare small businesses, particularly women and people of color-owned businesses, to be able to even step up to the plate of taking advantages of some of the resources and services that we currently have in place?
Madam Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, yes, we've given that a great deal of thought, and I'd mention 2 things. I'd mention our Business Technical Assistance Program, where providers have the ability to help start up business with a business plan and getting their books in order so they're aware of what the lender may ask for. as they go to visit a private lender, or even if they're coming indirectly to us through our lending programs. And I would also say, as Jim Terrell in CPED Business Development likes to talk about, there's an access to capital need, right? But as your question suggests, and I know that you're right, it's not just that it's hard to get capital, it's that you have to be ready to ask for it and then be ready to have the answer be in a position for the answer to be yes. So I would say, so yes, we are working actively on both of those things, and yes, I agree with that is a need that's out there to provide the help that a business needs to get to a place where the answer is yes when they ask someone else or us for capital.
And then I guess if I can continue, I would echo Councilmember Johnson's comments that, a lot of times some of the challenges that small businesses face are not necessarily in CPAD's purview, but some other department that is impeding their efforts. And so I would suggest that it's got to be somebody's responsibility to talk to these departments to eliminate those barriers. And I'm not sure if it's CPAD's, but
Madam Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, I'd say as you all agreed that the small business team was a good thing to have, and with the more than capable leadership and staff on the team, that is exactly within what we consider the small business team's role to be, to at least name, if not propose changes to make it so a small business gets to yes to Councilmember Johnson's comment faster, sooner, and more predictably, whether it's a CPED roadblock or some other departments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say that we're done. So I'll leave it on this super interesting debt service and transfer slide and say, Madam Chair, thank you to you and the committee for your time and attention today. And if I may, a special thanks to Karun and Mahajan for helping pull all of this information together. We appreciate your attention and thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for your time. Colleagues, we're going to switch gears here to the convention center. So I'm going to give them just about 30 seconds here to transition.
Jeff, you been here?
We'll let people move in and out of seats here. Welcome, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Go ahead when you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Chair Palmisano and committee members. My name is Jeff Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the Minneapolis Convention Center. Also joining me today are Mark Zerbel. He's our Director of Events and Facility Services. Chris Hunges, who is our Director of Business Services, and a special thank you to Chris for putting this program together. We also have our urban scholar, Sahib Ali is here in the back, and then our partners from Meet Minneapolis, Melvin Tennant, the CEO of Meet Minneapolis, and Katie Smith, our Director of Sales and Marketing. So 2018 was a historic year at the Convention Center in many ways. The results portrayed in this report positively impacted our community. These results are exciting because they highlight the hard work and preparation that the Convention Center staff has undertaken for many years. Our staff is committed to being the best for our employees, our clients, and our community. In 2018, we were able to leverage this effort with successful results. The performance measures that are tied in the budget to the Downtown Assets Fund. As all of you guys know, the Downtown Assets is supported by the hospitality sales taxes. They provide the funding for the Convention Center, which includes Meet Minneapolis, Target Center, PV Plaza, and Downtown East Commons. We take pride in representing Minneapolis to the world, and we do that through a workforce that looks like Minneapolis. Economic inclusion at MCC is about jobs, jobs, jobs. Our staff consists of 56% people of color. Many of these individuals are first-generation Americans that have a love for service in their heart. A career in hospitality is open to all. We have positions that required skilled education and training, and we also have positions where hard work and a smile brings success. And I'm not just talking about our frontline employees. We've been working really, really hard to continue to provide opportunities for growth in the convention center. We're doing that through a new shift lead program where we have staff that goes as a lead in order to get some opportunities to have a more supervisory-like role in order to grow into that. And we also have been doing that through our details, and so temporary positions in leadership that come available, we've been allowing people to be in those for a short time, again, just to get that basis of what it's like to be a leader in our organization. 50% of our supervisors are also people of color, and 20% of our managers are people of color. So this has been working. We still, though, have work to do, but the convention center really does have a culture of growth and inclusion that makes it a great model of how opportunity can provide economic inclusion and benefit through employment in the hospitality industry. Now, we've not been as successful in attracting women to our workforce, and we do struggle with traditionally male-dominated job classifications where recruitment of women is challenging. We'll be working going ahead with our business services department and our new human resources generalist, Destiny Zhang, to help recruit women for our union positions. Our union positions take up most of our FTEs, and so working with the unions to make sure that they're reaching out and they're helping us provide the opportunities more and to recruit more women is something that we are working with them going forward. We also, again, want to make sure that we're providing those leadership opportunities so that we can have growth from within the convention center. When we look towards our spending with diverse suppliers, the graph and results on this part of our page are a little bit misleading for two main reasons. First, 12 million of the 27 million in supplier spending flows through our contracts with Meet Minneapolis and AEG Facilities. They're the operator of the Target Center. But of the remaining $15 million that's left over, we are at a 20% spend with diverse suppliers. Also, the graph itself, you can see a large spike between 2016 and 2017. That was when we were in the renovation of the Target Center. And so as part of the renovation, we did have SUBP goals, and actually our workforce goals through Mortensen, our construction manager, were higher than the goals that we were provided, and we did a great job of having women and minorities on the project, but this doesn't take into account those SUBP goals going forward. So I think we're doing a great job. It just doesn't, the way that this information is being put forward doesn't necessarily call that out. Obviously, we will continue to strive to work with procurement and civil rights to exceed these goals. We've been doing a lot of things even this year through the Target Market Program in our investments in the convention center, and so we look to expand that going forward. So why does the city invest its hospitality sales taxes in the downtown assets? Again, I would go back to jobs, jobs, jobs. Our activity produces taxes, jobs, and opportunity. The convention center is the foundation of the Minneapolis hospitality industry. Of the $90 million collected in 2018 through the hospitality sales taxes, our activity generated an estimated $20 million of those taxes. And of the 35,000 hospitality workers in Minneapolis, our activity supported 8,600 of those workers. When we talk about economic impact, it is really a broader look at how we can estimate how much our visitors spend when they come to town. It's not an exact science, but we do know that the spending is significant for convention center events because generally when people come to the convention center, they are here for 3 nights, 4 days. Their stay is much longer. And so for those of you that travel and you know when you go into a city and you're there for that long, expenses do start to add up when you start to talk about hotel expenses, any of your food and beverage expenses, going out, leisure travel, all of those expenses do become quite substantial. And we estimate that spending just from the convention center to be $408 million. That's about $1,000. So again, as you relate that spending to a 3-night and 4-day visit, $1,000 makes some sense. Obviously, the core of the city receives a lot of this revenue and a lot of this spending, but we also see that our visitors do get out and explore the city, especially on Eat Street, on Nicollet, and other areas outside of the central business district. Our partnership with Meet Minneapolis will continue to work to educate and excite our visitors because we do feel that we are a gateway to the rest of Minneapolis for our visitors. For 30 years, the hospitality taxes have been supported by our activity and helped sustain our operation. As the additional downtown assets and U.S. Bank Stadium begin to take more of a share of these taxes, the convention center must continue to use its resources responsibly. There are several risks to our continued success and as the foundation driving the hospitality community. The economy has been very strong, as we all know, but any weakening of that economy will affect our business. During the recession of 2008, we saw our revenue drop by 20% at the same time that the taxes and the tax receipts dropped. So sustained reductions in both areas would cause more stress on the Downtown Assets Fund moving forward. We've also fallen prey to an unfair state law that caps only the city of Minneapolis's local taxes at 13%. When other governmental bodies raise their taxes, the cap causes the lodging tax in Minneapolis to be reduced. Since 2009, that lodging tax has been reduced from 3% to 2.125%. Going forward, we are at risk to lose an estimated $3 million yearly in tax collections because of this cap. Intergovernmental Relations has been working on this issue through our legislative agenda the past 2 years, and recently the tax committee of the legislature has moved an amendment forward that would restore our lodging tax to 3%. And we're hopeful that the state passes this and that it will have to happen in a special session, but it will hopefully become law here in the near future. When we start to look just at the convention center, we've had a very nice 5-year run of increased revenue and occupancy that has led to a reduction in our reliance on that $20 million of hospitality taxes that we produce each year. Our operating subsidy, which is paid for by those hospitality taxes, reached its lowest point in recent history at $5.7 million. As recently as a decade ago, our hospitality taxes covered a subsidy of $15 million, and so we've been able to significantly reduce that. And now those dollars can be used to reinvest into the convention center and make sure that we remain competitive going forward into the future without having to take out debt or pull from any other resources. The success of the convention center and the increase in hospitality sales taxes is very much connected to the efforts of Meet Minneapolis. 2 of our key performance indicators with Meet Minneapolis deal with their ability to bring visitors to Minneapolis to stay in Minneapolis hotels. These numbers indicate stays into the future as Meet Minneapolis works out an average of 5 years to secure events. Hotel room supply has very much increased in Minneapolis over the last few years. And as you can see, Meet Minneapolis has kept up pace in filling those rooms with visitors by increasing their room nights by 50,000 in a 5-year span. Tourism is also an important aspect of Meet Minneapolis's work as Minneapolis continues to grow as a destination for tourists. 2018 shows a very large increase in the amount of tourism and future leisure room nights. That was because a third-party operator created some additional capabilities to better serve our community, and it was kind of a one-time allocation increase to these future leisure room nights. We don't expect that this is the new normal. We expect this was kind of a blip in the radar and that we'll go back a little bit more towards normal going forward, but we also do know that we have had great success from a tourism standpoint, and I know a lot of the efforts that Meet Minneapolis putting into tourism is showing great rewards.
Mr. Johnson, I'm not sure I understand. What events were associated with that increase in leisure room nights?
Chair Palmisano, leisure room nights really tie to tour operator events that bring tourists into the city many times through bus groups, and what Meet Minneapolis does is they get a reporting back from the different tour operators each year. Well, one of those tour operators did a kind of a special event, a special capabilities for this year, and so their numbers went up quite substantially. We don't expect that will happen each year going forward, where that's the new normal. It was kind of a one-time special thing that they put together.
I see. Is the convention center doing anything then to continue to attract similar kinds of one-off pushes and that sort of thing?
Chair Palmisano, when it comes to tourism, that is more under Meet Minneapolis's purview. I could have Melvin come up and speak a little bit to tourism if you would like.
Welcome, Mr. Tennant.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. As far as further explaining what our additional leisure efforts will be, we're always exploring new markets. For example, with the new International Air Service, we're currently working with Explore Minnesota Tourism and several other convention and visitors bureaus to take full advantage of the new flights to Korea, for example, and also Mexico City. So that's just an example of always looking for ways to increase leisure tourism, which basically is anything that is non-convention. So any leisure purpose, whether it's for coming in for a special event, or coming to visit families, or just general tourism to take a look at our city.
Thank you.
Hope that helps.
Yep. I don't
Thank you.
see any other questions.
We'll move on then. For many years, the Convention Center has worked diligently to make sure that our impact on the community is positive. Our sustainability program is an industry leader, as shown by our LEED designation, Green Meetings Industry certification, and two-time International Association of Venue Managers Venue Excellence Award. Some program highlights are: we offset 100% of our electrical energy with wind and solar power. Since 2014, we have avoided $1.1 million in energy costs. We saved over 20 million gallons of water. We've avoided $100,000 in water fees. And as we look at recycling, we have consistently recycled 60% of our waste. And if you can look on this time frame, that's about 3,200 tons of waste that we have kept out of landfills. That's the equivalent weight of about 640 African elephants, or enough volume to fill 30 small homes. So we have a lot of waste. We've been taking care of it well, and we're very, very proud of our programs. And these programs have really become part of our culture. They're very much employee-led. The outcomes prove that our team's commitment to operational excellence and using our resources responsibly is what we do every day. I want to go back and look a little bit at our energy. As you can see, it spiked somewhat in 2018. The reason for that, if we can remember back to the weather in 2018, it was a very cold year and a very hot year. And so this really calls out some of the challenges that we face in our new rapidly changing climate, and the Minneapolis being in a climate that has these highs and lows. And I think what we really have done to benefit here is, by all of the work that we've put in, we've been able to keep our energy usage still under what we were doing in 2009. So by doing the programs, by having energy conservation, by putting in all the LED lights that we have in the building, we've been able to defer some of those costs that we would have had if we wouldn't have done this work. We also have been able to, again, not use as much energy as if we had not done anything. And so a high volume year with a lot of people coming through the building, that means that they're using a lot of our resources, a lot of water, a lot of heating, a lot of cooling. And so the programs that we have put in place have really allowed us to, in these years, not use as much energy or spend as much on energy going forward.
Well, I just want to, I think, lift that up a little bit. The convention center's made many investments in energy infrastructure that use more energy for, you're saying, heating or cooling costs in 2018 than in any of these other years represented. But the water usage decreased even in 2018. Is that because of those longer-term energy investments that you've made? Like, I guess I imagine different kinds of restroom facility kinds of improvements. What would you say to that?
Yeah, Chair Palmisano, we actually in 2018 and through the beginning of this year, we've finished a program where we were replacing our restrooms. And so a few years ago, we did about half of our restrooms, and then we have just now replaced all the rest of our restrooms in the building. Everything that we put into our restrooms is at least 50% more water efficient than what was there before. Small things like the dishwasher that we purchased a couple years ago, again, is much, much more water efficient. But the big play that we did is that we put a large cistern in our back, underground in our back loading area, which collects about 5.4 million gallons of water, rainwater, every single year. And this is something that is fantastic for us because we have a beautiful plaza that is out in front of the convention center, and we used to be irrigating that with potable water, which is not sustainable, which is not a good use of resources. And so now we can use rainwater, keep it out of our sewer system, keep it out of the Mississippi River, put it onto our great green areas and our pollinator parks. And so that has been one of the very, very large benefits of the investments that we've made from a water standpoint.
Great. Thank you.
I'll switch through now to the Target Center. So 2018 was the first full year of the newly renovated Target Center, and you can see that historically our entertainment tax directly related from the events in the Target Center increased back up to a normal level. In 2017, we had closed the building for a significant amount of time to have those renovations, and so that's why you see the taxes falling in 2017. Now, when we look at 2018, there was we were hopeful that the taxes would be much higher than average just because of the new renovation. We ran into some challenges. Unfortunately, the NBA season attendance was not where we would have wanted it, and some of the concerts that we held in 2018 were a little softer than maybe we would have liked. But a little sneak peek on the first quarter of 2019. The 2019 was the best quarter in Target Center's history since about 2007 when AEG started. And so we're starting to see that momentum of the renovation come forward. That will come forward in the entertainment taxes that it produces, but it will also come forward in the overall profits and revenue that brings to the city. So it's been great.
Thank you. I want to point out for my colleagues that our audit team did do a review of the Target Center to see, given the heavy investment that we put into this facility in 2017, were we seeing the benefit of that investment? And at the time that we did it, we ultimately concluded that it was too soon to tell. And it sounds like what you're sharing with us from first quarter of this year is that now we're starting to see the benefits of it really pan out. So it'll be interesting to see.
Chair Palmisano, correct. I mentioned PV Plaza and the Commons. Currently, we are not tracking them in results. There have been pass-throughs. Green Minneapolis has worked with the city on those two items in the past few years, and PV obviously being under construction and now opening up here this summer. We'll look forward to see if there's anything that we can do going forward. And then I will just end with the small office building that we call the Talmadge Building that has been part of our facility management portfolio for the last 30 years. The building has operated at a small loss for most of the time, and it is in need of significant repair and maintenance in order to move forward as a office building. We've talked about this for the last few years. I'm currently working with Finance and Property Services to really think about if there's anything else that the city would need that space for. There's been quite a few discussions, and especially with a lot that's going on in the city right now, with police precincts, with potentially some shoulder needs as the new public service center opens up. And so we're working with Finance and Property Services to see if there's anything that the Talmadge building can help with going forward. But we're also looking and seeing what is the best use for that space. So Northco Commercial is our leasing agent, and we're working with them to see, is there something that we could do to that building to make it a more rentable office space going forward. But we will be shuttering the building this summer, and so it will be ready for whatever is next in its life going forward. So with that, I will pause, and if there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer them.
Councilmember Cunningham.
I just wanted to briefly say thank you for your leadership around the sustainability piece. That can be glossed over because of the fact that we want it to be a priority for everywhere, but you're actually really operationalizing that. And so just wanted to take a moment to raise and praise that and say thank you for your leadership and for making those investments and making it a priority.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, your convention center is nearly 30 years old, so how does your department prioritize future investments in this facility?
Chair Palmisano, we have a 20-year capital plan, and so as we work through the building, I think there's a few things that we think about. One is, what can we do to make sure that we keep our costs down, and many times that is the sustainability approach to it. What can we do to make sure LED lighting is a great example that we've been able to really reduce the amount of electrical costs that we have, and so we've been working through the building. It's a very large building. I think we have over 10,000 styles of lights fixtures in our building, and so it takes a while, but we've been working through the building in order to make sure that we are changing the building to all LED lights. We also look at the infrastructure and what do we need to do, what's wearing out. So we've just recently replaced the pipes in the kitchen. It's not an exciting project, but it's a project that was needed to be done. We're working on our terrazzo floor right now that was degrading over 30 years of work. And so the infrastructure, what the building needs in order to operate is something that we do. And then also looking at what are those competitive things that will help keep our building a place that people want to come and a place that we can sell going forward. And so things like investments in digital signage, where we are now able to make our building, one, look more modern, but also bring in new revenue through this new digital signage package that we have. And so working through those and a 20-year plan has been successful for us, and we feel great about where the building is at right now, but we also know that we have to keep investing in it.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions from my colleagues, so I'll thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Colleagues, we're going to transition to Director Barrett Lane and the emergency management part of our presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome, Director Lane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Barrett Lane. I'm the Director of the Office of Emergency Management. I'm here to brief you on activities in 2018 through the lens of the results program. Before we get into the slide deck, which will go quite quickly, I want to just give you a little bit of the context of where we're at. As you know, we've been in the process of a multi-year reorganization and reconstruction of the emergency management function. This is the last year of that function, or that reconstruction. So by the Q1 of next year, our goal is to deliver what will be a comprehensive current service level for this organization. That's going to include the strategic plan, all their operational capabilities, as well as new performance measures, and then link that back to the budget. So we'll have that baseline established that will represent a reasonably mature organization that you can ask the questions that policymakers want to ask, and that is, if we give you more resources or less resources, what's the impact on performance? If we give you more mission or less mission, what's the impact on resources or performance? In order to do that, we have to have the whole system built out, and that's what we ultimately will be delivering in Q1 of next year. Our goal is to have that be an input into the 2021 budget process, but this is the culmination of a complete rework of the organization from the bottom to the top over the last few years, and we appreciate the council's patience as we've gone through this and build it out to national standards. So with that, 2018 was a meets expectations year for us. You can imagine, right now we're in this design build phase, if you will. We're measuring performance based on how many projects we get done toward getting it delivered by Q1 of next year. We got the projects done that we needed to and moved into 2018 with another set, or 2019 with another set of projects that's going to wrap up the overall design build work, if you will. What we will be doing as part of this last phase is resetting then the performance indicators. Because if you think of it as a factory, we've built the factory out, and if you're building, you want to know when it's going to be done, are you on budget, how close to being done are you going to be. That's how we've been measuring work up to this point in time. Once you have the factory, you want to know, does it produce the widgets I want it to? Does it produce as many of them as I wanted it to? And does it cost what I expected it to cost to operate it? You know, measures like that. And that's the transition we're going to be doing next year, because we're going to stop with the build it performance measures and we're going to move into the run it performance measures. And we'll be having conversations, both the results team, finance, and other stakeholders to make sure that those performance measures are meaningful and that the key performance measures that come up out of all of that detail at the management level that to you all are ones that are going to give you the assurance that you understand that these are the vital signs of the organization, and if those vital signs are good, the organization is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So that's the overall objective here. For 2019, bottom line, or 2018, bottom line meets expectations, and going into 2019, 2020 with the plan in place. So let me just walk you through the results process here. Here you can see this is just an overall overview of the budget. That 60% has to do with the number of projects that we had in process, not with the percent of the overall project being done. But that really is what we expected, so lines up with the expectations I had from my team as far as what was going to be delivered in 2018. Oops. I was told to be brief, but not that brief. So we'll back up one slide. Spending with diverse suppliers, credit here to the target market people. We really appreciate their support as we find opportunities to meet this city goal. You can see that we're doing well in this, but just recognize that a lot of the money that we're accountable for is grant money that gets passed through the other departments. They need to participate too in order to have it reflect back on us. So we'll continue to make sure that we have those conversations as we go. But it really depends on what the grants are being used for in that particular year. There's not a baseline that you can attach a particular trend to, but certainly we're going to continue to pursue this through the target market program and anything else we can think of to achieve that goal. Priority one here is basically just what I alluded to. This is just the build out. This is the 2018 phase of the emergency operations comprehensive build out design build part of this. A lot of those bullet points have to do with that. I will say that we also delivered the EOC operations for the Super Bowl in 2018, a successful operation there with many state and federal partners. Just an opportunity to again say thank you for all the citywide team that made that happen and made that a success. And I will note that we were recognized by our federal partners for the work in the Homeland Security Information Network space there. That was the tool that we used to visualize what the EOC is doing during the operations. We continue to use that. Last year we did start the NCAA Final Four prep, and we delivered that, of course, in the spring of this year.
Director Lane, a question or comment from Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Director Lane. I'm just curious, you guys have been able to exceed diverse suppliers in 2018. How can you continue with that success?
Well, that's, I think, what I was alluding to earlier, Madam Chair, Council Member. Ultimately, it just depends on what we're buying that year. And every time we have an opportunity to buy or to contract, we go to the target market program and say, can we do it through this? And that's really the discipline that brought us to this point. But it depends a lot on what it is that those grants are being used for that year, and that's not entirely always within our control. That's a enterprise decision. So I don't think I can guarantee anything other than continuing to make sure we make the push. Then it kind of depends on whether what we're buying or contracting for hits the right filter, but we're certainly not going to stop pushing on it.
So intentionality, I hear you saying, is a really key component.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, correct. That's our commitment. And again, this isn't the same set of services year over year, so it's not. There's no way to predict what that package of purchases are going to be next year or even this year, other than making sure that we try to value this mission as we go forward. I think it would be. I just can't represent to you that it's going to be anything in particular.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And Director Lane, you don't have a sense several years out as to what kinds of new purchasing needs you might have in a future year? Or how long in advance do you know of what it is you might be needing to go and purchase or do in an RFP?
Yeah, Councilmember, Chair, a lot of this happens year to year. So the grant comes in, we sit down with a bunch of requests that come from the enterprise, and maybe the police department needs something this year that they didn't need last year. Maybe they bought that, but then they need the training for it this year. The fire department has needs. The health department has needs, and a lot of it just depends on where they are with their programs. So I don't, in that part of the budget space where we're making purchases is relatively, dollar-wise isn't huge. Percent-wise, it's good, but that's not most of where that money is going to in the first place. We're just not buying a lot of stuff for our own needs. Yep. There will be something in the budget request this year that has to do, well, I suppose we should get into that in the budget request, but a lot of the things that we have asked for in the past, for instance, some of the upgrades to the EOC have been really enterprise purchases to continue to fit out that building.
Okay, thanks.
The last slide here again just summarizes generally the progress that's being made here. Again, with the caution that the percentages don't relate to the percentage of the project being done, but the percent of the work that was completed as originally conceived in 2018. With that caveat, that met expectations, and we're still on track to have it done as scheduled next year, unless, of course, we end up with some sort of major issue, which we hope not to. So, as you can see here, the various components of the top line metric are in those yellow colors there. Basically, that's saying that all of those pieces are still in progress, and because this data is fairly lumpy, you're not going to see those turn green until it's all done. They'll be in progress until they're done. So next year, we're hoping to come with a green block to say that we've actually addressed all of those elements. But then, that's really the last time we're going to see that particular block. We'll have built that, and then the pivot we're going to have to make is to, now that that's built, what do we expect it to do? And how do we make sure that it does what it needs to do to make sure that the city maintains its resilience? So that's really that pivot we're going to make through this year and into next year. 2021, you'll see the first set of data that comes out of that new set of performance measures, and then I think we will see some trend data as we go forward.
Thank you. That's logical and makes good sense. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? No.
Well, thank you once again. I appreciate the opportunity to appear, and we appreciate the support you all have provided for the program over the years.
Thank you, Director Lane. We're going to switch gears here briefly and invite NCR, Neighborhood and Community Relations, to switch gears here on us. Something I did want to say as they're transitioning the slide decks on the screen is that given the recent given the extensive conversations that we've had around Neighborhoods 2020, I've asked that Director Rubidor spend more time on some other aspects of NCR's work during our results presentation today. Certainly, City Council actions that we've taken recently are going to lead to substantial neighborhood program changes and supportive services changes, and some of that we don't know yet. We won't know until that process is complete. So Director Rubidor was hoping, and I agreed, that we'd look to be able to discuss the other significant work that this department is doing, especially within the limited presentation time we have. So with that, I'll open it up to you, Director Rubidor.
Chair Palmisano and council members, good afternoon. I'm David Rubidor, the Director of the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department with the City of Minneapolis. I am joined today with a number of our staff. I have Karen Moe, who is the department's Deputy Director, and Cheyenne Brodeen, who is our Internal Services Manager, as well as a number of our urban scholars. We have 3 urban scholars with our department this year, and they have joined us as well. Karen and Cheyenne worked a lot with the results team, and I want to thank the results team in really helping to think through some of the performance measures that are before you today. I know there was a number of questions that were presented in advance around the results analysis, and I'll try to address those as we go through the presentation. I do want to mention that in 2016, when the City Council adopted our blueprint for equitable engagement, we also put together our results dashboard at that time, which is still up and running on our website. So any of the measures that you see here today can be found on our website, as well as a number of other measures within the department. So feel free to take a look at that at your leisure. Our work is really broken into 3 program areas and a total of 10 measures to go over today, 5 of which are around the neighborhood program stuff, and I'll, as the chair mentioned, I'll touch on those, but I'd like to spend the majority of the time on the other 5 within the department, given the work that's going on with Neighborhoods 2020. I would say just overall, the trend in all of our measures looks good. We have 6 of them in the green category, 2 are yellow, and 2 are also new, which are green. Regarding enterprise priorities, the first one is around workforce diversity, and I'm very happy to say that we meet the enterprise goal for people of color since the creation of this department. I know Council Vice President Jenkins mentioned at previous presentation about how that happens, and I think intentionality is a big aspect to that work. We take pride in the diversity of our staff, and we know that a number of our positions are actually aligned to work within diverse communities, and so there's kind of a natural tendency for that. But we also have higher diversity within all positions within the department, and so that's just been a value of ours, as well as we've also hired 2 urban scholars, previous scholars within our department. I also want to mention that we do meet the city's enterprise goal for women, and my management team would be upset if I didn't mention, other than myself, it's an all-woman-led department. They wanted me to point that out very clearly, and it's been great to have that in place. So we have a great management team in place, and I think we have some really talented staff. On the second enterprise priority is around diverse suppliers, and the department also exceeds diversity, exceeds the citywide goals in all 3 categories around diverse spending with minority-owned suppliers, and spending with non-minority women-owned suppliers. And again, I think this has a lot to do with intentionality and a bit to do with the nature of our work. We also spend quite a bit of time, if we have vendors that are out there that we think are really eligible for being in the target market program, to really consider applying to that, encouraging them to partake in the city's work. And so I think it's a combination of those that have led to that. 2018 was a busy year for us. In addition to the Neighborhoods 2020 work, there was 2 other major projects that were undertaken. The first of which is the establishment of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. We all know that on the federal level, there has been a lot of challenges that have been presented to our immigrants and refugee communities across the United States, and Minneapolis actually has a very large and robust immigrant and refugee community here, people from all kinds of different places in the world. And recently, over the last several years, cities across the United States have really recognized their role in being able to support their immigrant and refugee communities and actually take a broader stand and a stronger stand around a number of policy issues that are facing us. And so under the leadership of the mayor and the city council last year, we were able to establish the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. The major body of the work last year was actually getting the director hired for that position, and we utilized a community-led process in order to do the selection of the director of the office. Multiple organizations were involved with us in helping to put that together. The director has been on, in 2018, was on board for about 6 months out of the year, and during that time period, she was able to establish an internal support team. Being an office of one on such an important topic, it was critical that we establish a network within the city in order to be able to get departments on board and carry out that work, and that team has been established. We also created the Immigration Bulletin to provide elected officials and other city officials with the latest information regarding immigrant and refugee issues in our city. And then we also, working with community partners, put together what we call the Rapid Response Pathway, which is around the 3 organizations that we are currently funding to have rapid response to critical immigration issues that come up within our city. And in 2018, that was established. In 2019, that's been employed a number of times. The second big priority in 2018 that I just wanted to mention was the municipal ID program, and that this was a major initiative to get the municipal ID identification card ordinance adopted. The department led a multi-department effort in order to create the ordinance, working with a number of council members as well as other city departments. A municipal ID is an opportunity to provide a government-issued ID to residents that are unable to get other forms of ID. It helps to build community pride and allows for self-identification such as gender and preferred name. I'm happy to say that we continue to work with the city clerk's office, which is the department that's been tasked with the implementation of the ID, with helping to be able to put that together. Our first program area is the neighborhood engagement and support, and as I mentioned, there's 5 measures in this area. I'm going to go through these. I do want to reserve time to make sure I go through the other parts of the presentation as well. This program really primarily focuses in around the neighborhood organization funding and the support services that are provided by the city. Neighborhood organizations connect directly with residents and build relationships, assisting with getting residents engaged in civic life, build a sense of community and pride, and provide valuable information and communication for our residents. They work on community building activities, housing preservation and development, crime and safety concerns, environmental issues, park enhancements, and economic development, among other projects. There are 5 measures in this category. The first 2 are really around NCR-related activities, and the other 2 are around neighborhood organizations themselves. The other 3, are around neighborhood organizations themselves. The first one is around neighborhood board training. This measure came out as neutral. It is a new measure that we put in place in 2018. We had 31 neighborhood organization board trainings last year, which means that we touched 44% of the neighborhood organizations with board training. Board trainings are really important because they help to build the board's understanding of roles and responsibilities as leaders of their nonprofits, and also awareness of city programs. The second measure is audit services, and this measure is yellow, being basically stable from year to year. We saw about a 3% increase over the years. Audit services include financial audits, financial reviews, agreed upon procedures, 990 filings, and other types of similar activities. This is critically important in that it helps to ensure the proper use of funds, adherence to organizational internal processes, and also build public trust in the decisions that organizations are making. I will say that the department is currently, as part of the Neighborhoods 2020 process, really looking at kind of revamping that particular aspect of our work to be more around capacity building and how we can actually work more closely directly with neighborhoods on that. The third measure in this area is neighborhood board diversity. This measure is yellow, being basically stable and actually in some areas a slight decrease over year. Having diverse representation at the board level where decisions are affecting resource allocation, programming, and staffing decisions are made is important. Our goal in our work is to be able to have neighborhood organizations the leadership of neighborhood organizations reflect the diversity of their communities. One of the questions that was in the results analysis was how do we actually measure that? And what the department does is actually conduct a survey every 2 years, a voluntary survey of all the neighborhood organizations, board leadership, board members in essence, to respond to a number of diversity factors, which includes race, but it also includes 7 other factors. This is a complicated issue, and as we go into our Neighborhoods 2020 discussion, we'll talk more about that in detail. But basically, as independent organizations, the city has a limited role in what we can do, but we do have influence in this particular area with our funding as well as with our program requirements. One of the questions also in the results analysis is what is we as a department are currently doing in order to support board diversity. Our staff actually work with neighborhoods one-on-one to build awareness around connections with cultural communities, outreach, and inclusion. And in 2016, we adjusted our review process for any applications coming in to include both our neighborhood as well as our cultural engagement specialists to work with neighborhoods. And that included site visits to each of the neighborhoods in the city to talk about strategies about how to get more people involved into their organizations. We've held workshops around training people in order to become board members. We partnered with community organizations through our One Minneapolis Fund around building leadership and using already existing community resources in order to encourage diversity within our diversity leadership within our organizations. We have learning labs, and I'll talk about those in a little bit more in detail in just one of our final results. And then also we have our Community Connections Conference, which I'll talk about a little bit more in detail in a minute. Regarding the last 2 measures in this program area, we have tracked volunteer hours and also the number of households reached through door knocking. In 2014, we started a process of having neighborhoods submit annual reports. As much as that might seem not necessarily that important, what it does do is after 2 decades of basically neighborhoods not sending in specific reports about their activity, annually we're asking neighborhoods to check in with us to tell us what activities they're doing. This has two basic impacts. One is it actually gives us a lot of information about what's going on out there, but also, secondly, it also tells neighborhoods what we value. In essence, we're measuring what we value, and these are 2 areas that we ask neighborhoods to take a close look at. Neighborhoods do really well about leveraging volunteers in our city. As you can see on the chart here, we've seen a 24% increase alone just in 2017 through 2018 over volunteer hours, and the number right now is over 134,000 hours of volunteer time that neighborhoods have leveraged in 2018 alone. Households reached through door knocking has also increased around 18% from 2017 through 2018. There's 2 things that I really attribute these significant increases to. One is that when we started this measure and we started putting this in place, we had to do some training with board and staff members as well as volunteers about how to really track that. And it gets really into kind of some specific stuff about being able to go out and whenever you have an event and when you ever have something going on, to really make sure that you're writing down the number of people that attended, how many people volunteered their time, and to track that versus waiting until the end of the year. So I think there's better reporting that's coming out of that. And then secondly, as I mentioned, by actually measuring this and tracking this, neighborhoods know that this is something that we value and that we're looking for from them. And so the activity itself has actually picked up as well. Moving on to the other program areas, access and outreach. This program area is really around how we support a lot of our engagement with cultural communities as well as federally mandated programs such as the Americans with Disabilities Act and language access. Our first measure on here is around resolve ADA complaints. This measure is green. Last year in 2018, we had 45 complaints addressed, which is an increase from the previous year. NCR has really spent a lot of time since the creation of this department to really elevate and enhance the city's work around the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we've done that in several ways, including having the council approve a ADA action plan, and then as well as having 2 staff that are trained ADA Title II coordinators. A question that was in the results analysis was the typical types of complaints that we receive under this program. They include everything from like right-of-way concerns around sidewalk-related work, curb cuts, snow removal, construction bypass issues. We also deal with program service delivery, architectural barrier removal, business-related access, and parking. One of the other questions that was asked is really what's differentiating between NCR as well as other city-related responses. And we just wanted to break that down a little bit more. We handle a lot of the concerns that come in that other city departments may not have either the expertise or the ADA expertise on staff in order to handle. So we tend to be the first clearinghouse. So folks send us complaints or questions around accessibility, entrance requirements, policies such as service animals, review of city actions to ensure ADA compliance, neighborhood organizations about accessible spaces. So we get a lot of those type of requests. The category in here that has to do with city departments is when a department actually has trained ADA expertise and a process to be able to deal with that ADA issue. Specifically, Public Works and CPAD both have those types of structures in place. And so when a complaint comes in or a concern comes in those particular areas, we refer that to them. Government agencies and others, we do get a lot of requests around specifically businesses and or things that actually have to do with another level of government, and we pass those along accordingly. I will say there isn't really a good locally based clearinghouse about information to the general public about Americans with disability requirements. And as a result, the department's become known for our ADA expertise, and so we often get a lot of questions and comments simply because other people don't have places to go. And we try to do our best to be able to answer those questions and get people referred to the help that they need. The next measure on here is radio programs. This is something I'm very excited about and very pleased with. We've seen from 2017 to 2018, a 58% increase in this measure, with 14 additional radio shows being added in 2018. It's been a goal of in a collaboration between the Communications Department and NCR and the City Coordinator's Office to really expand the city's use of culturally based media as effective ways to get information out to our non-English speaking community. In 2017, we started a collaboration, the collaboration with the Communications Department to actually start a show on La Raza Radio in Spanish to really talk about city projects, city information, getting that out to the Spanish-speaking community. Mariano Espinoza in our office started a show on La Raza and was able to demonstrate quite quickly how effective this was in order to get out timely information to the community. Radio show topics included everything from hate crimes and discrimination, traffic control, elections, employment, DACA, 311, renters' rights, and also the safe and sick time ordinance information. So in addition to that, so after a year of success with that, with the Communications Department, we looked at expanding this into the Hmong community, which that radio show was added last year, and late in the year we were able to add a radio show in the Somali community. So we anticipate the number of shows in 2019 will be considerably higher even than what was in 2018. We also added in 2019, just starting this year, a show on KMOJ for the African American community as well. Our radio programs continue to provide timely and accurate information to our non-English and other cultural communities in the city, and we will and it continues to support not only getting information out about basic city services, but also some major projects that are coming up, including the upcoming 2020 census. These will be major ways of us to communicate information out to the community. The next measure is on community support for community partners. This measure is currently gray or neutral, as it is new. This is really associated around two funding sources that we send out that deal directly with services to residents. This would be our Immigration Support Fund, where we are supporting 3 different organizations and providing services to the immigrant community, as well as the work that we've been doing to support our senior chore service organizations as well. Our chore service organizations have really fluctuated over the years, and in 2018 was the first year the council awarded us $80,000 so that we could cover all areas of the city, and so we started including that in our measure as well. For a relatively low investment, we're reaching over 3,200 residents in the city with some really important information and services that are helping our immigrant and refugee communities and our seniors to be able to stay in their homes. The final 2 measures include, go into the Coordinated Engagement Services Program, the first of which is Learning Labs. We started in 2017 this notion of Learning Labs, which is really around having training and, in essence, a workshop on effective community engagement, which covers everything from immigration issues, gender dynamics, religion, history, historical experiences, trust in government, cultural communication and media, sacred spaces, events, holidays, and among other things, to really train staff, neighborhood organizations, and other community partners around how to do effective engagement in a variety of different cultural communities. It was extremely successful. In 2017, we had, I don't have the number there, but we had a little over 100 people participate. In 2018, that grew by 67% to 228 attendees. And I would say in 2019, that number continues to go up considerably. It's very popular. We do a evaluation for folks that go through it, and we get really high rankings for that, and actually have been requested to do a level 2, which is a little bit deeper dive into some of these techniques and issues and kind of cultural concerns that people have in order to really learn how to work with different communities in the city. So even between 2017 and 2018, we doubled the number of learning labs that we are offering due to the demand. One of the questions that was in the results analysis was who's participating in this. I have to say almost every city department has sent staff to this. The city attorney's office, CPAD, civil rights, health, and the clerk's office by far have sent in a lot of staff to go through the learning labs. We've also seen a doubling of the neighborhood organizations' participation between 2017 and 2018. And I will say in 2019 already, we've exceeded the number of neighborhood organizations that have been participating. We've already exceeded the 2018 number, and we've only done 1 set of learning labs. There's also a question around the other category. The other category is basically other community-based organizations, other nonprofits in the city that have joined. These are open to the public, I should say. Residents in the city that are just interested in doing this and have just an interest in being there. And then more recently, we've had a number of other government agencies actually attend, Hennepin County in the state of Minnesota, to be precise. Our last measure for today is the Community Connections Conference. Every year, the department hosts the Community Connections Conference at the Convention Center. And we bring together staff, community organizations, and residents to share experiences, conduct trainings around common issues and opportunities, and to learn from each other. The conference is extremely popular and it continues to grow. This measure is green on 2 levels. The first of which is just on attendance, which increased 27% from 2017 to 2018. And the second is around racial parity. One of our goals with the conference is really making sure it reflects all of the people of Minneapolis. And we do a demographic request of folks when they're signing up and registering for this. And so we're able to track that, and we get really good participation on that. 2017, we actually, the conference attendees reached racial parity with the city, meaning basically with the city being 40% people of color, and starting in 2017, we attained that and continued that in 2018. I will say in 2019, the numbers actually went up considerably higher. We gained a little over 200 additional attendees, and that will be in, I guess, next year's report. We do a lot of efforts around, one of the questions in the results analysis was around what do we do in order to get that really diverse representation from community. And so we do a lot of efforts around reaching out to a lot of members in our community through a lot of the networks that we currently have, such as our radio shows, such as our staff connections, in order to encourage people to attend. And so that has led to, I think, the success both of the numbers of people coming there, as well as the kind of the diversity of people that are there. We also open it up to organizations across the city that want to actually do workshops and present there, and give them the opportunity to do that as well. And with that, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher, and then Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. And thanks for this. I'll keep my comments brief because we've been talking about a lot of your program a lot at the council lately. But I will just note, in the context of these results conversations, I think this is maybe one of the hardest departments to figure out how to measure something that feels meaningful. There's a lot of measuring tactics and a lot of kind of measuring activity, but not necessarily measuring outcomes. And so I guess it's great that we're doing radio shows and holding a conference, but does that add up to our residents feeling engaged and communicated with and part of things? I'm not sure how we would measure that without a survey tool, which I know we don't do anymore, and I think it might be worth thinking about how we get to measure outcomes. But I think for me, in terms of thinking about the future of results around neighborhood and community engagement, I think I want us to think about how to get to outcomes, because this doesn't feel like there's much actually for me to engage with in terms of really understanding whether we're doing something that feels meaningful.
Chair Palmisano and Councilmember Fletcher, if I could respond to that. I totally agree. One of the things in this, and the challenge in this work, is a lot of this is relational, and it's how people feel. A lot of the stuff that we measure is transactional. It's around, are we doing different activities that should lead to people feeling better engaged? But we don't actually know. It's hard to measure that last piece without actually talking to as many people as you possibly can. So some of the things that we've done with our results dashboard, because we debated this internally for a long time, is really looking at those transactional things and then seeing how that relates to activity that shows just really kind of an increase in participation. And so some of the things that we looked at is if we do a lot of work with like the radio shows and outreach and what have you, if trust in government is increasing within cultural communities, are they using 311 more? And they are. And that number's not included in here, but it is included in our dashboard. That number's gone up. And so is that a direct, can we say that absolutely that's what it's from? No, but we are seeing significant increases there. So we're trying to look at ways to take those transactional things that lead to those more substantial feeling changes that people may have. And it's an open conversation, and I welcome the council to help us sort that and make sure that we're getting the right measures in place to be able to capture that.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Rubador. Just speaking to Councilmember Fletcher's point, I was a part of the conversations about trying to pick the metrics, and I think that this really exposes kind of a gap within the results metrics, because they're very quantitative, and the work that you do is very qualitative. Yep. And so how do we measure that? How do we put those sort of measures in place, and how do we capture the qualitative aspect of the work? I use the example of, an outcome being neighbors feeling more connected as an outcome. Like that would be data collected by door knocking and say, do you know your neighbor's name? As an indicator as to whether or not folks are connected to their neighborhood. And so I think that this is a good part for us to continue having a conversation as a council, as well as with the results team, to figure out how do we capture those qualitative measures as well in metrics. So to the question and point I wanted to make, the metrics that we have here don't necessarily capture the work of the cultural community specialists. You mentioned Mariano doing the radio La Raza program. Could you speak more to what cultural communities specialists have done and and what they've brought to the department?
Sure. Chair Palmisano and Councilmember Cunningham, our cultural community specialists really spend the majority of their time out building relationships with different communities in the city and creating those kind of pathways for not only communication but building trust within the community. And so a lot of this is around relational, which again is that piece that's a little bit harder to measure. But they've supported a number of initiatives to put them in like real tangible form. So currently, a big issue or big initiative that we're working on is the driver's license. There's a big push, and hopefully we'll see what happens today or tomorrow, around being able to provide driver's licenses for folks that are undocumented within our city. Within the Latino community, that's been a big effort. And so as much as Michelle Rivero, who's our Director of Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, has really worked on the policy side of that, of working with Gene in order to how that gets shepherded through the legislature, Mariano's been working with the community to understand what that means, be able to help get their connection and their opinion heard, how they can be affecting that process and what have you. So they're big piece on that. Municipal ID is similar, where it has multiple impacts within the community, and so our staff really work on that. Another big effort that we have underway right now is the census work that's going on. It's going to be critically important that we have strong buy-in and trust within all the underengaged communities within the city in order to be effectively counted when we come up with 2020. Come up to 2020. So our staff are working with Alberta in our office in order to continue building that relationship and that communication and raising and elevating that importance of having community partners in helping to get the census work done. And it gets down to things as direct as the recent NOR verdict and our staff for the Southeast, for the East African community, working with the mayor's office on really advising the impact of that decision within the East African community, and then working with community members to try to understand what that means and being able to also articulate that back to the city around the impact of that decision. So it kind of covers a variety of different things, and these are just some of the examples of things we're working on right now.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure that we took the time to speak to those folks and their work as well. And I hope to see more collaboration between the council and those folks as well. Just for my colleagues to know, it's like, for my ward, over 20% of my ward, around 25% are Hmong. So there's a good chunk of folks who there's a very significant language barrier. And so being able to build power and be able to build relationships in that way, because it's like if we want to build trust, then knowing who their elected officials are, and we also represent Somali folks, and so being able to have that support to be able to help our constituents, that would just be really helpful to take into consideration for the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else in queue. Did anybody else have something they wanted to share?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I would just comment, and I'm not sure if you guys can take direct credit for this, but in the 18 months that I've been serving on this council, I don't think I've seen as many engaged citizens. And I've been involved in city government for a number of years. I know a lot of it is just neighborhood activism. I think a lot of it is attributable to my colleagues who have campaigned on engaging community, but I would say over the past 18 months we've had a number of engaged citizens, residents of the city, on a variety of topics. Certainly, I think big issues like our 2040 comprehensive plan, the work that your department is doing around Neighborhoods 2020 has brought a lot of people out, but there has been a lot of engagement, and I would suspect that some of it is attributable to the work that NCR is doing. So with that said, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rubador. Thank you, Department, for all of your time and your energy and your thoughtfulness on this results presentation. We're going to adjust to our last one, which is a 911. As we transition over to that, I think yep, Jonathan's right
Quick, thank you.
at the ready here. Thank you.
All right. All right, thank you.
Hi there, welcome.
Welcome, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairperson Palmisano, Vice Chair Fletcher. My name is Christine McPherson. I am the current interim director for the 911 department, and I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you today about 911 and our results. I'm just going to jump right into it. So the 911 department budget includes a 911 state surcharge and that $10.5 million number that's up there. I just wanted to mention that. It's about $515,000 that the 911 department receives directly from the state. That number is directly correlated with the results of the last census that was done in 2010, so I expect that number will be changing. That's why I wanted to mention that today with the results of the 2020 census that will be happening soon. Also, that money is considered a grant. There are special controls and auditing that's done every year to ensure that money is spent on 911 technology or continuing education of 911 personnel. So that said, we've got the performance measure there. We were a little bit down from where we want to be last year. We're working on addressing that. That is directly correlated to some staffing challenges that we've been addressing in the 911 department, as well as I can share those are 911 staffing challenges that are going on across the country and throughout the metro here. We actually are a little below with some of our counterparts. We have two priorities actually at 911 with this program, 911 call handling and dispatch operations. There's only one measure up there though. The one that's the easiest for us to measure and the one for which 911 directly has control of is how quickly we are able to answer 911 calls. The whole other piece of that is then what happens once that 911 call is answered, and then the subsequent dispatching of public safety resources. That measure is completely dependent on the resources that are available to dispatch, and that's why those departments, the police department, the fire department, tend to put those measures in their results. The fire department, as an example, almost always has a resource available to dispatch to an emergency. Our average dispatch time for that is 15 seconds. Police department is a much different story. But generally, for emergency calls, those are dispatched as soon as a resource is available. In our enterprise priorities, you can see we continue to work with our human resources partners to expand these reaches we have for new hires. I recently saw some job trend data that shows that it's going to become harder to find qualified employees to do this kind of work, which is why we've really expanded our outreach. We do have the Pathways to Success program that we partnered with Hennepin Technical College. I was actually honored. I got to speak at their graduation ceremony on Tuesday night. We had 22 very diverse candidates that graduated from that program, and we have at least 2 of them that are currently in a hiring process here in Minneapolis and several others across the metro. So that's been awesome to be a part of. On the spending side, I just want to note that the 911 department has very little spending that we do that is up to us. Most of our spending is technology and services to directly support the 911 program. Many of those vendors and support services are really large enterprises, Motorola, CenturyLink, the big players in the game. The money that we do have control over what we spend, which is a little bit, we have a lot of recruitment, public education and recruitment efforts that we've been doing, and we bought some things to go along with those efforts. We've really worked hard with the target market program and the city's purchasing process to spend that money locally as we're putting it back into the community. Again, on workforce development, I'll just kind of focus on that last bullet there. We've really been partnering with HR, trying really hard to remove the barriers in our hiring process. It's extremely difficult. It's still about 7 to 9 months from the time a person applies for a 911 dispatcher job until they're hired. A big chunk of that is a 911 or police background that we do on a background investigation. Some of that is just absolutely required because of the type of information that we all have access to. That said, we have been able to shorten that down a bit, and we've been really good about communicating that to candidates so that they really understand the process that they're going through, and we're not just leaving them out there hanging. Again, I'll just mention on the turnover side, there is definitely a shortage of people doing the 911 work, both here in the metro and across the country. It's something that I've been working with labor relations here to address, as well as at even the state and the national level, to get some recognition for 911 dispatchers as true public service professionals, and find creative ways to attract people into this profession. I don't ever see it changing from being a 24/7, 365 job with holidays and shift work and weekend work, but we need people here to do the job, and so we have to find ways to get people to come in and do it. As for the physical environment, I did want to talk about that just a little bit today. There was no question on this last employee survey about the physical environment, but the 911 center has been in the basement of City Hall since 1989 is when we moved down there. The project was in planning since the mid-'80s. In the 80s, I think the whole idea of putting 911 in the bunker was, kind of a new thinking at the time and a safe place to put it, but it really isn't a good place to be doing that kind of work day in and day out. I know the city's invested in a new public service facility for city employees that's being built now. One of the challenges we have in 911 is not only upgrading our current facility in the basement, because there currently is no program or project in place to do that, but even the 911 furniture and workstations are pretty much at end of life and need to be replaced. Also, 311 is part of that group that will be moving into the new building, and currently our backup or disaster facility is located within the 311 center, and so we need to have some planning done to figure out where the backup is going to be for 911, and even it probably shouldn't be just right across the street from where we currently are in that new center. So there's just some opportunity there, and I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. It's one of the issues that have caused employee concerns with the workspace down in the basement for some time. So moving on to the 911 call handling, I did mention that our call answer times have gone down. One important thing to note here is we were not able to measure answer times prior to 2016. The equipment that we had in 911 just didn't support it. Our best guess, back of the envelope math at that time, though, put us at about 85 to 90% of calls answered in that time. So we had a really big push after we implemented new technology in 2015 to improve those answer times. We were working hard to keep our staffing up, and all of that contributed to having those awesome numbers of 96 and 95% in 16 and 17. We did fall a little below that in 2018, and we are working on getting that back up. It's a balance, how much overtime people can work and getting the staffing in. We have a new contingent of 911 dispatchers that were hired in April. 7 of them, they just completed their classroom training, and they will be answering 911 calls on their own by mid-July this year. That should bring us almost all the way back up to full staffing. And that is all of my slides, my slide deck. I know it's been a long day for everybody, but questions?
Thank you, Director McPherson. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you. I actually have a few questions. The first that I'm curious about is, can you give an update about the ProQA system? Because I know that there was a switchover, and then there was some pushback from the employees and challenges around that. And I know that the leadership has been looking into what's the deal, how can we make this work? So I'm just curious if you have an update on the ProQA system.
Right. So we started down that road with ProQA in 2017, and in 2018 we were pushing to get it fully implemented. That's when we realized there were some issues technologically with the way that the program interfaced with our computer-aided dispatch system. We worked with the vendor. Actually, we are still working with the vendor to get some improvements there, and we are planning to make another push to really roll that program out in the very near future. Right now, it is being used by about 20 staff who have been hired since 2017. The more experienced staff that have been there longer, some of them are not using it as frequently. It has had really great effect. I mentioned earlier that answering a 911 call is not the end all, right? Even if we answer the call immediately the second it rings, you still have to do something with that information to really help somebody. And so in that respect, the protocols, we've always had some type of a protocol. This is just a system that's putting it in front of people so that they can act on it right away. In March, I was extremely honored. One of our newest dispatchers at that time, she'd been here for 7 months, had answered a call in late 2018 from a woman who was home alone, middle of the night. Somebody's breaking into her house. She dialed 911. We got the police information, got the police started right away, but she's frozen in fear, doesn't know what to do. The dispatcher followed the new protocol, explained to her that she needed to find somewhere safe. Was there a room in her house with a door that locked? She said, oh yeah, my bathroom. Okay, go in your bathroom, lock the door, get in the tub. She followed all these instructions. The police arrived. Long story short, they arrested 2 people that had actually broken into the house, were destroying the house. This woman was totally safe. She wrote a really long letter to the 911 center saying if it hadn't been for that dispatcher, she doesn't think she'd be alive today. So the protocols do have a place. They don't work for every call, and they still need some improvement, but I think it's going down the right road. Actually, many of our partner agencies or metro agencies will be implementing some similar technology in the next year.
Great. So actually, that example of a call leads into my next question, which is 911 operators are exposed to a lot of trauma and probably inherent a lot of secondary trauma as a result of that. Are there resources that are available? I know that folks are union, so it's kind of hard to get them to come in for like trainings, but what kind of resources are available to be able to help our employees sustain themselves with such traumatic work?
Okay, thank you for that question, Councilperson Cunningham. We actually are revamping an internal peer support team. Information just went out, and I think the deadline is later this week to get staff members that are interested in helping there. In addition, as part of my work with the Metropolitan Emergency Services Board 911 Technical Operations Committee, we secured grant funding for resiliency training for 911 dispatchers throughout the metro. We're going to kind of follow a train the trainer program with that and train different people from some of the different 911 centers to be able to go out to other 911 centers around us also and provide that training. The average 911 dispatcher has about 18,000 citizen contacts through their work answering 911 calls every year. As you mentioned, that's not only an opportunity to hear a lot of trauma, right? Nobody calls 911 on their best day, or at least very few people do. It's also an opportunity to have that contact with citizens, and so making sure that our people are prepared, rested, in the best possible state of mind, and able to be empathetic and helpful to those callers is extremely important.
One last question, if I may. And then kind of furthering that point, I'm just curious, from your perspective and in your leadership role within the department, what can be done to better support employees so that we can retain them? So I know moving out of the basement, for example, is an example, but are there any other ways that we can be better supporting the 911 employees?
I think one thing very important for the 911 program right now is to get ahead of that hiring curve. We were there, I always say, for 5 minutes in 2010 when I first became the assistant director, and it's a place that I think we really need to be at. As much as our staff in 911 has come to rely on overtime as part of their regular day at work, I think it's important to make that something that's more rare. We need a staffing level where every single time a person calls out sick or unexpectedly can't be at work or even takes a vacation, that it doesn't require other staff to work overtime. One of the things I am working on spinning up, I guess, for 2020 will be an actual staffing study. We've done informal staffing studies through programs with our professional associations that they offer kind of templates and matrices for what the 911 staffing should be. All of those say we should be staffing at like 4 to 12 more dispatchers overall than what we have now. If we actually wanted every 911 call to be able to be answered within that 15 seconds, it would be like 36 more dispatchers. I don't think that's a reasonable ask, but somewhere in the middle, there might be a number that if we actually had that level of staffing, we reduced the amount of overtime and people had a better work-life balance, this might be a position that they can see themselves staying in for longer than 3 to 5 years.
Great, thank you so much.
Director McPherson, You mentioned being ahead of the staffing curve for about 5 minutes in 2010. Our city has grown significantly since 2010 in terms of population, and with that comes, the planning for an increased number of calls, just kind of a per population kind of figure. What do you suspect has been, I guess what I'm asking is, I think you've already answered it actually, which is the number of what it would take to answer all calls within 15 seconds or less. And that would be based on today's population of our city, or whatever that count is of the number of people in our city at any given time.
Yep.
I want to thank Councilmember Cunningham for making that question, for asking that question about wellness, because when we look at first responders, 911 callers are 911 dispatchers are absolutely a part of that really critical work for public safety. And that's intriguing to me, your answer about it being more of a grant-funded piece when we are looking at other models of rollout and how we do that to enhance the culture of a department over time.
Right.
So thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. One metric that occurs to me we're not tracking here is that number of calls, which I think is potentially a really interesting trend for us to look at. I think there's an assumption sometimes that growing population is going to mean growing 911 calls. That hasn't necessarily been what's happened, at least from the police standpoint. They reported that 911 calls where police were dispatched were flat. So I guess I'm curious if you happen to know off the top of your head what the call volume has trended over a few years, and if not, I would just suggest for future years that might be a metric that's worth including.
No, thank you for that question, Councilperson Fletcher. The statistics that you're asking about are something that we track and discuss at the user board meetings, which is the police chief, the fire chief, the director, and usually the city coordinator. We are holding steady with the number of 911 calls. It's about 450,000 calls. The one that has gone up a little bit is our non-911 calls, or we call them the 10-digit calls, people who call directly in. A lot of those are also emergency calls, so I tend to include those when I'm talking, as well as the calls that we have to make on behalf of the first responders who are responding to calls. So our total overall calls in and out of the 911 center is about 850,000 a year. I believe we answer more 911 calls than Hennepin County or Ramsey County, but they each have more overall calls because they don't have the 311 center taking some of those less serious calls.
Ms. McPherson, the types of calls from the different types of ways we look at public safety, and for example, domestic calls, calls about, people within a household asking for something from a 911 dispatcher. Do those continue to go up? Do you know this off the top of your head? If you don't, I understand. My understanding was that they do. They have gone up, and those are very complex, very time-intensive kinds of calls to take.
Right, and that goes back to why we implemented the protocols. 911 calls involving some type of a family dispute, whether or not it's a true domestic. As a 911 supervisor from 2001 until 2005, when I kind of looked at the data holistically, I'd say it was about 40% of our calls. Now, that doesn't mean 40% of our calls were actually domestics, but they were some type of a domestic, a child running away from home, somebody who wants someone to leave. They might not be totally violent, but there is family dysfunction that I think is behind a lot of 911 calls, so it's hard to quantify exactly where that number would fall. I do know the protocols have been super helpful, even with the domestic violence calls. There was a call in the 4th precinct where we never used to ask how many children were in the home and how old they were on domestic calls, and that's one of the questions that we now ask is that protocol. And the call in question had turned into a standoff, and because we'd asked those questions, the police officers knew that there was a disabled child on the 2nd floor of the house when they made entry.
Thank you for this. Other questions or comments from my colleagues? I'm not seeing any. Director McPherson, thank you for all the really important work that you do.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. And I just want to also share that absolutely under no circumstances are we not doing the job of answering 911 calls quickly. We are still at that 98% of 911 calls answered in 40 seconds, and the calls that are ringing longer are those times when we're getting multiple calls about a single event. So when there's like 1 or 2 people calling into 911, those calls are not taking time to get answered. It's when we're getting a lot of calls at one time that we're struggling with those calls, and I'm making that point for the public that we serve. We are answering those 911 calls, and even if your call isn't being answered, if you're one of 10 or 12 people that are calling, there's probably already help on the way, even if that call hasn't gotten answered yet.
I think that's really important, and it's an important point to get out and to message out. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Colleagues, I really appreciate your time today. I would like to make a motion to receive and file. First, the Fire Department's Budget Committee report from last time, and then also the results Minneapolis departmental reports for CPED, the Convention Center, Emergency Management, NCR, and 911. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you for your time today. We are adjourned.